the 10 basic principles of service design. The first one is already quite a paradox. It is called, hello? Look at your service as a product. That is quite a paradox, but why should that make sense? Because we come from a product and technology paradigm. In the last century, companies were very much focused on developing products, and they have a lot of expertise in developing, marketing these products. And I think from a service perspective, we can learn a little bit from that perspective. So what does it mean exactly? If you are developing products, it is totally clear that you have a product strategy where the benefit, the target audience, the price segment, the competitors, all that is clearly defined. When I look at service companies, even today, no matter if in the private or in the public sector, I do see that there is often a lack of clear strategic positioning of the service. And I think if you want to design a service, you do need to develop this strategic positioning. And this is just as important, employees should know about that strategic positioning. So it does not help if you have a nice consultancy that develops a strategy with you, and then you put that strategy into the drawer, and the employees that are at the front stage interacting with the customers, the users, do not know what the strategy for the service is. So when I start working with a company, or with a public sector organization, I usually try to understand if they already have a strategy for their services, or if it is something that needs to be focused on. And that leads to a second point, and that is portfolio. When you work with the producing industries, it is totally clear that they will have a product portfolio, and that they will try to balance the milk cows and the pets and the stars, and make sure that there's always like new and innovative services in the pipeline, that the stars are being harvested after they have seen their peak as milk cows. And this kind of development and management of the product portfolio is something that comes natural when you are in the producing industries. When you are in the service industries, it does happen quite often that there is no service portfolio, that there is no overview of all the different services that the provider is offering, and that they have not categorized these services from that perspective of stars, cash cows, or pets. But you could also structure the portfolio from the perspective, what are paid services and what are unpaid services? What are services that are visible to the customer, and what are services that are not visible to the customer? And this kind of classification, categorization, can help you to identify services that you might want to push into visibility, services that you might want to put a price tag on that so far are being offered for free. So working with the portfolio offers quite a few different perspectives and how to look at the service system that a provider is hosting. And last but not least, when you work with the producing industries, they will most certainly have research and development department. Somewhere internally or externally, research and development is a just natural part of the product and technology domain. When you look at service companies, it is not necessarily guaranteed that they will be having a research and development department. They might not have an explicit budget for research and development and innovation. That is something that is continuously changing and getting better, but still for the reflection on where are you in your development as a service provider, the question is on how systematically have you integrated innovation through research and development in the system of your services. And just some people who know me have heard this before. In the year 2004, in Germany, there was a research about how much money do producing industries put into research and development in average per employee. So in average per each employee, how much money would they put into research and development? And in that year, I think 2003, the answer was 3,247 euro per year in average per employee into research and development. And in the same research, they looked at how much money do service providers put into research and development. You can now ask yourself, how much might that have been? 67 euro per year per employee in average. I mean, that was the year 2003, and I have never seen again another comparison of these budgets. But I still find it really interesting to talk to my clients about that question. Where are these budgets? How high are these budgets? How are they systematically used in order to bring innovation forward? So service as a product, look at your service as a product. Ask yourself, is there a clear service strategy? Do I take care of my service portfolio? And is there a systematic investment into innovation through research and development? The second principle says focus on the customer benefit. Sounds totally natural. We are living in a customer-focused society, we think. But I would like you to do a little experiment. In case you have a little piece of paper and a pen at hand, draw the org chart of your organization or an organization that you know that you're working with or for. If you don't have a piece of paper and a pen, maybe you try to just envision it. So just a deep breath. It doesn't have to be beautiful, just that we see the principle. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. Oh, this is crazy. I cannot stop my screen sharing. I don't believe it. My mouse is gone. Oh, now something happened. Okay. I would like you to hold up your piece of paper in case you have one. I would like to see some org charts up here. Still working? Oh, that's a nice one. Fiona, do you want to say 1 or 2 words about that org chart? You have to unmute yourself.
I'm working with the University of Arts London, and we've got a dynamic between, they've got 6 colleges like Central St. Martin's, and we're trying to establish University of Arts London as a brand in itself. So there's that whole dynamic to college, Central University, where do people sit within the organisation?
Great. Looks like a satellite system. Like a system of satellites. Nice. Anybody else want to hold up your org chart? Yes, Mette. Okay, I cannot see that. Yeah.
I'm working in a company where we have like a service department and a design department, or we have deep skills within the 2 different. And then we have a loosely coupled network of designers and communicators and business people working together with us at all tasks. So you could say we are in some ways a very small organization, and in other ways we are kind of very large because our network is very large.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. It's also a networked org chart, no hierarchies. Anybody else? Does anybody have a more classical org chart? Anybody else wants to share, even if it's not classical? Ah, I see something there. Okay, Betsy. Go ahead. Maybe you unmute yourself and say 2 or 3 words about it.
It's a little bit more classical. We are broken up into 3 categories. We've got service design, a change management initiative, and then OpEx. So there's a lot of, it's not a huge company, but it's not tiny, so there's enough levels. And it's interesting in that service design is fairly new to the organization. So it's a lot of internal education as well as education with the clients.
Nice. I mean, that was indeed a little bit more classical than what we usually see. Let me share my screen again. So I would say from the past, we would see more of these kind of like silos, and then combined with levels and hierarchies. And these are like organizations that are basically self-centered. They have specialized departments where they put the lawyers with the lawyers, the designers to the designers, the marketing guys to the marketing guys, the HR people work with the HR people, because they all speak the same language, and they understand each other, and that's much more efficient than mixing them. And in the end, often we find kind of like Tayloristic assembly lines where the customer is processed through the organization from one silo to the next, in order then in the end to push him out of the system. And in many organizations still today, we do not exactly find a responsibility for the customer experience. I mean, it is changing, but again, where is that responsibility? It should be in each department, and each department should be focused around the end user. And that is something that I find really amazing, that it happens very, very rarely that you find the user in these org charts. The org charts are built around the organization, around the specialists, and they represent the efficiency of the organization. And the customer is just not there. And I find it a quite interesting experiment to ask my clients to turn the org chart upside down, to put the client on a piece of paper and then draw on that piece of paper the touch points, the organizational units that the client gets in touch with, and try to rebuild that from the client perspective, so that in the end, the organization is all focused on that client, and the client is on the top and not at the bottom of the whole thing, carrying the weight of the very expensive administration that these organizations usually have. So it is just kind of like a play with visualizations of organizations, but I strongly believe that these visualizations also represent an attitude, and changing that attitude is, of course, what we want to achieve through service design. Another thing that I usually do when I start working with my clients, I ask, so what is the services that you are delivering to your customers? And they often say, well, we commission maintenance for IT systems, and we have these specialists that are able to do remote maintenance, and we also do analytics, and we have all these competencies to then consult properly. Is that a service value delivered to a customer? No, it is not. It is the competencies of an organization. But how do you turn these competencies into benefits? How do you say that you unburden your client from worries around having to take care of IT-related issues, and making sure that the client is always up to date with the latest development? So it's also just a little twist, but that twist indeed helps to get away from that self-centric organization that talks a lot about their specialisms and their competencies and their outstanding brains that they have, and talk about what is it that they deliver as a benefit to the customers. So it's about customer benefit. Think about the value that the organization provides to the user while they are using the services. Think about structures and processes that should be really focused focused at the customer, at the user, and not be self-centric, and at the processes that should be simple and combined and brought together in a way that it is not the user that has to walk through the service, but that it is the service that comes to the user. In Germany, McKinsey has done an analysis last year about what happens when you give birth to a child. It is indeed the fact that you have to be in touch with 6 different departments do administrative stuff, and that administrative stuff overlaps usually. You have to put your social security number, all your basic data, the date of the birth for the child. It's always the same stuff that you have to put into those forms for your employer, for the insurance company, for the registration office of the government, for the department that takes care of children and parent money, So it's 6 different departments. And I assume that some of you have gone through that experience of giving birth to a child or becoming a parent. You are happy and you are busy with other things. You don't want to sit in front of your screen or in front of even paperwork and fill in the same stuff again and again and again. So how could we bring all these things together as processes and make life easy for the user? We have to dive into the customer's world, and that is the message to the companies when I work with them. Where do you have your eyes and your ears at the customer? Where is it that you listen? Where is it that you talk? Where is it that you understand? I think that is a key principle that encourages people not to try to solve problems before they have even started understanding them. Because usually we are tending as humans to come up with solutions really fast. We like solutions. So Bob, I've got this idea, let's do it. But very often we are putting a Band-Aid on wooden legs by doing that, because we have not really understand what the disease is. And so we have to take the time. We have to understand that sometimes even more than half of the time goes into understanding, and that then the solution is really quite evident. Einstein once said if he would have 1 hour to solve a problem, he would spend 55 minutes in understanding it. And that's quite radical for somebody like Einstein. The solution comes up then immediately. Risk to go for an open discovery. Depending on how closed or how open you ask the questions when you try to dive into the customer's world, the more limited or the more rich the answers will be. If you come up with a very precise question that can be maybe even answered with a yes or no, you will have a very limited yes and no input for your solution. So we have to encourage people to risk to go for an open discovery with an open question. I'm full of quotes tonight. You all know Antoine Saint-Exupéry, and I like when he says that you have to lose sight of the shore for a long time if you want to discover new land. And that is a bit what I try to bring to my clients. If they do not already have these organs that are connected to the user, to the customer, then they have to develop them, and they have to develop them in a way that they go beyond these very narrow and closed questions. And I encourage clients to combine different approaches. In service design, we come from, let's say, more humanistic, qualitative approach. We use different qualitative methods. We combine them as we could call it triangulation. We might do observations, we might do interviews, we might do design probes, we might do workshops. We do, of course, also do data analysis. We dig into existing knowledge on a specific topic. So we combine different approaches. More and more, I think, in the service design world, we are also learning to combine quantitative data with our research. So far, I only know 1 service design agency that has hired a data scientist, but I find that really cool to bring experts in that know how to work with big data and that know how to draw knowledge and understanding out of these big data, and then combine that with qualitative approaches that, well, question these insights, that enrich these insights with the human perspective on it. So I'm really thinking that we are more and more combining the qualitative and the quantitative, and within that different methods that give us different angles on a problem space. And do all this in partnership with users. So it is not as if we are the scientists that have this little microscope or the magnifying glass and we look at these users, we observe them, we draw knowledge from them. I think from an ethical perspective, we have to make sure that we are like on eye level with our participants in the research, that we are very transparent about what we do, what we are searching for, that we share the results and not being secretive about it. I think that is something that helps also to build relationships with the service provider if the research that is done in partnership with the users is something that is done with respect, transparency, and with a high willingness of sharing insights. See the big picture. I think that's quite evident. In service design, we encourage companies to take 2 or 3 steps back, because the service that the provider is giving to the user is not necessarily identical with the experience of a problem or a desire that the user has. So we have to expand the timeline and start looking at the situation before the user ever encounters the service provider. And when the user goes out of the service provision, he might not necessarily be where he really wants to be. He might be on a little, baby step in that direction. So looking at what happens afterwards also inspires potentially innovation, potentially combination of different services from the same or from different providers. When you look, for example, at the airport experience, that was a couple of years ago that the airport of Graz in Austria invited me to work with them on the airport experience. It is really an interesting question. Where does that airport experience start? Does it start when you go to the parking lot? Does it start when you enter through the glass doors and move towards the check-in? Or does it start when you book your ticket? And in the end, of course, it does start when you book your ticket, because that is the moment when you make the decision on which airport you're going to use. From then on, it is done. And where does the airport experience end? Does it end when you check out of the plane, when you check up your baggage, or when you arrive home? So you have to zoom out and you have to zoom in and you have to make decisions based on available time budgets, available financial resources. You will not always be able in service design to design for the big picture, but you should always know where in the big picture is the process, the phase that you are designing for. So you expand the timeline and you expand the actor map. By zooming out, you suddenly realize that the public transportation might play an important role in the airport experience. You might even find that the ticket platform where people buy their airport tickets might be a touch point where the airport should play a greater role or could play a greater role. So through zooming out, you expand the actor map and you open up opportunities for innovation. Because I would say today and even more in the future, service innovation will happen in a hybrid value creation where different providers collaborate in order to create better experiences for people. And through this zooming out and looking at the big picture, you are able to identify the opportunities that come up from collaborations between different providers. And it also means that you have to expand the system in a sense that you look at benchmarks, but you might also look at the newbies in the system. When you look at the financial sector, in the past, the banks would look at other banks when they were trying to innovate. They would not do much more than other banks would do, just maybe a tiny little bit. Today, when you are in the finance sector, you have to look at Google, at Apple, and you have to look at totally new ways how financial transactions are being done. And between those are providers like Uber, or Airbnb that scale up the expectations of people. So you have to see that bigger picture to understand how expectations of users will be changing through experiences that have nothing to do directly with your own service system. So we are already moving to the 5th principle. You can take a deep breath, because after that comes a case study, and after that comes Q&A. So be ready for good questions. Oh, zoom in and zoom out. I already said that. So the 5th principle, for those of you familiar with service design, it's just totally clear. Design the customer experience, or shouldn't we better say design for the customer experience? Because we are all aware that we cannot design the customer experience. We can only design for a potential experience. And when I work with clients, I try to understand where is the responsibility for these experiences, which are the principles for these experiences. Are there connections between the strategy and the expectations and the requirements for experiences in a service, service journey? So I try to understand, how do they step into the shoes of their customers, users, or even personas? And how can they go on the journey with these personas in order to understand where do we have the opportunities for great experiences? Make sure that the basics are solid. I think it is wasted time to make great experiences for the customers if the basics are not well designed. Then you can go for the identification of these wow moments that make the unforgettable experiences within a service. So designing experience is very, very basic work, and you cannot always make it great and fantastic and outstanding and exceptional. So you have to go on that journey. You have to understand through your research where are the opportunities for the unforgettable moments, and then put the effort for the design work into those moments. So those were the first 5 principles. I said I would share with you a little case. It is an old case, and you will understand why when we come to the very end of this session, because I will revisit this case from a different perspective. It is a case that I think was started in something like 2006 in Helsinki. As you might know, Finland is one of the most advanced countries in the domain of service design. They have embraced service design already in the early 2000s. The first service design companies right after UK were born in Finland. And the public sector especially was very, very open-minded to use service design to innovate the relationship to citizens. And one example that I was partially involved in was the Helsinki Library. At that point, when you would look at other countries all over the world, a library would be a place where you borrow books and maybe DVDs and CDs. So you borrow stuff. That's what a library is about. And the library makes sure that you give it back in time and that you pay your penalties in case you are too late. And Helsinki Library asked itself, what is the future of the library? What is the relevance of a library in a time when people will no longer read printed books? And that time was already, you could touch at it. So they came up to say that the city library of Helsinki, which is called Library 10, is a library service point in the city center. It's a place for creating, displaying, and publishing culture. It's a public city space. That was quite revolutionary at that time. It repositioned the library in a new and challenging way. So they really regarded their services as products, and they created a clear service strategy saying, we are a public city space that is a place for creating, displaying, and publishing culture. No longer borrowing books and DVDs and CDs. So based on that strategy, they designed the place in a different way. They changed the opening hours to start at 8 in the morning. They provided spaces where people could just drop in and read the newspapers. They had express workstations where you could you know, do the booking and the returning very fast. You could have the very fast pickup of reservations, and the payment of fees was done in a remote way. So no longer had you go to the counter to pay your fees. What I really loved about it, they did a lot of user research, and they identified the elderly people as one of their important target groups. And they did a lot of home visits with elderly people, and they found that the laptop, the computer, learning how to work with computers was a big issue for elderly people at that time. And most of them already had computers. They needed help in order to, well, get the best out of that. And instead of continuing with seminars, which they had tried to offer seminars on classroom teaching, the computers were already there, the elderly would come and try to open Excel. It just didn't work. They would have forgotten how Excel works the moment they got home. So through the research, they understood that they had to work more on a club level in meeting points where people with shared interests, like digitalizing their photographies, or cutting films, or making financial planning for the household, so that they would work together and work on these topics as opposed to learning programs. And they also came up with this laptop doctor reception, where the laptop doctor would be available, and you would have an appointment, and the laptop doctor would help with upgrading whatever needed to be done. And that, I took that photo. I thought that it was really sweet, because it's you know, so on eye level, they work together on specific laptop related issues. They also had started to have stations where you could digitalize your video recordings and your photos. So they tried to really serve the needs of these people. There were recording studios, and they co-created these services with their users, with their customers. So the target group, younger people, they invited them to put theater plays on stage, and through that collaboration, they learned a lot about what these young kids really liked, what they needed, and how they could continuously improve their services in order to make this a place to create, to distribute, and to publish culture.